Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to Real Reflections. Hope you're all doing well. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to leave a comment, like and subscribe if you like what you see, and be part of the discussion. This is a follow-up video to my part 1 that I did the other day, where I basically just spoke about the latest first-time watches that I watched on Blu-ray and DVD. Followed that up with another 5 for you. They're all on Blu-ray. Slightly less of a somber bunch this time. The first 5 were essentially quite hard, a bunch of hard-hitting films. I only kind of realised once I'd like go, oh god, all these 5 are kind of downbeat or depressing, or about real life and stuff. And a lot of them, of course, were foreign films and art house films, world cinema. This bunch, they're all American, so all of them kind of culty films or classics from like the 70s and the 80s. But yeah, but that said, let's get into it. So the first film is a film I've been kind of, do you know what, 10 years ago, if with this film here, I would have turned my well, yeah, I would have, because I heard of this film over 10 years ago, but I would have turned my nose up at it and just thinking, well, it's probably just a mid-tier sci-fi actioner movie, probably not one of his best films by the actor in question. I'm not interested in seeing it. I've got more, there's more important films that I need to see, must-see films and whatnot. And then, over time, your tastes kind of change and your priorities change in terms of what kinds of films you want to be chasing. And now I'm kind of gone, I've embraced these kinds of films more that, yeah, they might not be like classics or masterpieces, but they have their own kind of charm and place, I think. And I've certainly wanted to hunt down more of his films in the wake of his passing a few years ago, because I was kind of embarrassed by actually how few of his films outside of James Bond that I'd seen, because of course I'm talking about here Sean Connery. That's Outland. 1980, Peter Hyams, probably best known for directing Capricorn 1, the sci-fi film from a few years prior, which obviously famously stars O.J. Simpson. Yeah, this is essentially kind of High Noon in space, right? High Noon, of course, being the classic 50s Western, directed by Fred Zinnemann and starring Gary Cooper, which is the kind of the famous story of the marshal who's kind of left all to his own devices. No one will help him. He's kind of abandoned in this town. All the residents refuse to help him with these criminals that are coming back to exact their vengeance upon the town and its residents, and he's all alone to kind of fight them off. A kind of searing critique or indictment of McCarthyist politics, or an endorsement of them, depending on your kind of interpretation and reading of the film. John Wayne and Howard Hawks were famously set to kind of star and direct in High Noon respectively, but they turned it down because of what they perceived it to be its anti-McCarthy stance, which is interesting, because John Wayne, of course, being very conservative and right-wing. Yeah, this is essentially High Noon in space. Sean Connery here taking on the Gary Cooper role as the sheriff of a kind of, or the marshal, I should say, of a mining colony on Jupiter, that essentially he uncovers this kind of corporate conspiracy to make workers work longer and harder hours after a series of accidents of workers that come to their untimely demise or inflict harm upon other people in the colony. And he kind of starts connecting the dots together, but no one else wants to see it, and no one else is interested, and no one else is willing to help him. All except a kind of like this semi-antagonistic relationship that he has with the doctor on the colony, who, I forget the actress who plays her now, but what's interesting about her is she's Connery's age, which might sound a kind of unremarkable thing to note, but I think Connery's, what, 51 at the time of this film? And she's the same age, which is kind of an unusual thing to have in a kind of mainstream movie, to have the love interests. Well, this is the thing, they aren't actually love interests in the film, not giving spoilers away, because they get round that by having Connery's character already married. So they get round that way, but to have like the two male and female leads the same age is quite unusual, I think. So that's an interesting aspect of the film. Really good special effects, lots of kind of old school practical effects here. A lot of which that have aged well. The ones that haven't aged well are kind of like the ones involving like death scenes with characters. I don't think they've aged that well, but a lot of the practical effects otherwise have aged really well. Clearly influenced by the original Alien that came out the year before, Ridley Scott's Alien, of course, with the kind of the industrialized aesthetic of the movie and its kind of its exploration of kind of class politics vis-a-vis kind of working class people blue-collar workers in space and how they're kind of exploited by these evil corporations. So I don't think the critique there is as effective or as thought out as, say, the one in Alien, because I think it's kind of abandoned in the last half of Outland, which kind of descends into a kind of generic action thriller in space. But nonetheless, it's a really, really entertaining film, and I do recommend it. I can see why it's a cult classic. And like I said, the effects have aged really well. It's also got, I think Jerry Goldsmith did the score, right? I think. So you've got some, again, who also did the score for Alien, so you've got some overlaps there. I think he did the score. Also got Peter Boyle, who's always a good actor worth watching. So, yeah, really good production design. So, yeah, worth a watch, guys, if you haven't seen Outland. This edition here is out of print now, this limited edition, but you can get the standard edition from the HMV Premium Collection, I believe. I think they have reissued it as a standard edition. But, yeah. Next one. I covered this in a video I did a few months ago now, where I kind of like basically just showed you my latest Blu-ray purchases, and I finally got around to watching it, and that's it's a World War II movie, Cross of Iron by Sam Peckinpah. Of course, the famous Western director who kind of, for many people, changed, the aesthetic of on-screen violence. Is probably what he's most renowned for, as well as his bitter struggles with the studios on most of his movies, and his kind of cynical worldview. A lot of his movies are very kind of dark or bitter, you could argue, and this is no exception. Told from the kind of Nazis' perspective, on the kind of towards the end of World War II, they're on the kind of Russian war front. James Coburn plays this corporal who has actually, has the respect of all his men, has actually got an Iron Cross, and a Maximilian Schell's character comes in, who's a captain, Captain Stransky, and he desperately wants his own Iron Cross, and it's basically kind of a battle of wills between these two characters. James Coburn's character being kind of someone who's kind of lost the cause or the reason why he's fighting, because I suppose because of all the things that he's been exposed to and seen and done, whereas Stransky, being a kind of more of a kind of a company guy, right? Believes far more in the kind of the war effort still, because he's been protected from all the kind of the frontline conflict, as it were. And so it's like a battle of wills between these two people. Essentially, it is an anti-war film, and I think all great war films should aspire to be that. One of the reasons why I'm not a huge war film fan, really, is because I think a lot of them just inevitably fall into that pitfall of inevitably glamorizing aspects of warfare, essentially. This goes a long way to not, though. Despite kind of the aestheticized violence that Peckinpah's known for, the edits, the slow-mo, the graphic violence. I mean, this is still an 18 because of its violence, actually, which is quite interesting. But yeah, the action scenes are fantastic. I love the kind of, it's a film that feels ragged and chaotic, like a lot of Peckinpah's work, that I actually think works to this film's advantage, but probably wasn't something that was necessarily overtly intended, but the result of probably studio struggles again. But really strong opening, really strong closing to the film as well, that ends with a quote by Bertolt Brecht, the playwright, which some people think is a bit clunkily used, but I liked it. And like I say, the beginning of the film is very effective, which has this kind of nursery rhyme play over footage of warfare and children of the Hitler Youth, which certainly grabs your attention. This is a film that really kind of throttles you, I think, which is, again, what I think Peckinpah is really good at doing, I think. And yeah, James Mason's in this as well. It's a very good film. I would certainly recommend it, one of the better anti-war films. In fact, Orson Welles, the director, famous director and actor, was so impressed by Cross of Iron, he actually wrote Peckinpah a letter to say it's the finest anti-war film he'd ever seen, alongside the original All Quiet on the Western Front from the 30s. So that's good praise. But yeah, certainly one of my... Peckinpah's a director who I've seen, I think, 50% of his films. And you kind of seem to have a strong reaction to them one way or the other, I think. And I'd say, yeah, this was a positive film, a positive reaction, or I shouldn't say a positive film, it's certainly not a positive film, but a positive reaction to the film, and one that definitely sticks with you. So yeah, I recommend Cross of Iron, actually. That's coming from someone who isn't a kind of war film guy. The third film I've got here is an independent film in the truest sense of the word. That word's thrown around a lot these days, I think, and we don't really mean, it's been misappropriated and abused, that word independent. But this director is certainly a true independent American filmmaker, and that's John Sayles. And again, I covered this, I think, in the same video as Cross of Iron on the Blu-ray purchases, but that's Mate One, 1987. Like I say, directed by John Sayles, includes a lot of its, John Sayles likes to use a lot of the same actors again, so it has like quite a few of the stock companies, such as Chris Cooper's in this. He's probably best known, Chris Cooper, for being the antagonist in Bourne Identity. I can't remember his name now, of the agency, but yeah, I was really impressed by Mate One. Particularly, it's a film that really puts you, because Mate One is essentially a film that depicts the build to the Mate One massacre in 1920, which is essentially a conflict between the workers of a coal company and the coal company itself in the struggle for unionisation, which of course I don't think is fully recognised until the early 30s in the US. So it's about the workers and the poor conditions in which they work, long hours, terrible pay, and of course the land that they're on in terms of what houses themselves and the families is owned by the mining company, as well as of course part of their wages. When they're buying their food, the stores are owned by the mining company, so essentially it's like another form of exploitation where their wages just go right back into the company's hands. Something that actually still kind of sneakily happens today, actually, in a lot of regards with some companies. But it's one of these films that actually reminds you how little, how much has changed, but also how much has stayed the same in terms of fundamental labour relations, I think. Obviously, you don't have people being gunned down outside of places, because obviously this does result in a massacre, which the film does depict. I think the best thing to say about Mate One as well is how much it transports you into that time. It's an utterly convincing depiction of late teens, 1920 America, and it's got some great actors. James Earl Jones is in this, and it really depicts the politics of the fragmenting of working class people, because you have the African American contingent, Italian Americans, and the if you like, the white working class. Okay, that they're all kind of antagonistic towards one another, because they're kind of competing, of course, themselves for better access to employment, and they're fighting for the hours essentially and fighting for the pay amongst themselves. And then Chris Cooper's character, who's a union man, comes along and tries to convince all these people to they're stronger fighting together. So it's a really great film about working class politics, and it's not a film, but it's not a lecturing film. It's a film that I think is a really good film to show people. I think it can politicize people in a really good way without hectoring them. And John Sayles is just really good at making films about ordinary people, actual believable people and characters. I think that's how he writes and directs his films. So that is really much a rarity, I think. I think it's a film look, it's not a film that's going to like really grab you in like the first 10-15 minutes. You have to, you get absorbed into the world and the characters in this film, I think. So if you like that kind of dramatic realism, I think you'll really dig this film. It's not a film that's like, it's diametrically opposed in a sense to mainstream Hollywood that's going to do all the kind of narrative gimmickry and suspense and set pieces to keep you entertained and along for the ride. This is a film that's going against those contrivances. So give it a shot if you, any of John Sayles' films really, if you can get hold of them. A lot of his work's kind of really hard to get and unavailable, him being an independent filmmaker, of course. The next film will be in a very damaged case that I've got here. It's by the Archive Collection, Warner Brothers, that have released a lot of interesting work the last couple of years. They've brought it over to this country, in the UK, Region B, so we're getting a lot of films that I've wanted to see for a while, actually, one of them being this one, albeit the cases are very flimsy. It got very battered and damaged, as you can see here. Prince of the City, Sidney Lumet, one of the great New York directors, right? 1981, a film essentially about, it's adapted from a novel, and it's a tale about kind of police corruption of narcos, right? So vice police, essentially. A New York vice squad, and a guy that decides to kind of rat on his fellow employees. And this is really a film that gets into the minutiae of the institution of the police, but not just police force, but also the law and prosecution. And it's a film that really, if you're struggling with this 30 minutes in, this is a long movie. This is 2.5 hours long. I think 2 hours, 40 minutes long. Stick with it, because it's a film that you really kind of attune your narrative expectations for. It's a film that really builds up an impact, because you're acquiring, there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of names, there's a lot of incidental detail, a lot of jargon. And it's something really that anticipates, I think, something like The Wire, the HBO TV show, I think. And by the end of the film, I think you really, it's almost like when it ends, you're most on board with it. So I'm actually looking forward to revisiting this. I don't want to talk too much about this, because I think I'll do a separate video on Prince of the City. And Sidney Lumet's a filmmaker that I think is capable of brilliant films, and also some not so brilliant films. I would put this more in the kind of brilliant camp, but one of his more underrated, underseen works, I think. But definitely a lot of actors you'll recognise. Not movie stars or anything like that, just bit players that you'll recognise, character actors and so on and so forth. Actually some really good shots as well of New York. It's a really good transporting film for that as well. And I'm still not sure about Treat Williams as the lead in this. I'm still not sure about his performance though. I don't know whether I loved it or not. But everyone else in the film I think is terrific. I'm still not sold on his performance though. He plays the detective Danny Cielo, who is the one who kind of turns on his partners, if you like. But then he has mixed loyalties between his partners, who he sees as being people that he can trust more than his own family. And the more he gets embroiled in ratting, the more he kind of is disgusted by the side of the law, as it were. But yeah, really, really good stuff. Like I say, it's kind of it's like almost like a halfway film between the theatrics of The Departed and the novelistic aspect of The Wire, I think. So check Prince of the City out. Another recommendation. These are all recommendations, to be fair, as is this one. Came out on Radiance, got it on, it's still in its limited edition print from the 70s. The Landlord, 1970, I think, to be exact, yeah. Hal Ashby's first feature film. And I think, from what I've seen, one of his best. I'm not the biggest Hal Ashby fan. I find a lot of his work uneven. The Landlord is still uneven in parts for me. I think it's not that it can't quite decide what film it wants to be, but I think there's a split between the more comedic aspects of this film and the more kind of political satire, or the political points that it really wants to make. I think for me, the two don't ever quite gel, and I think there's some pacing issues in this as well. But a film that actually is just, I mean, it's incredibly relevant, right? It's about basically this spoilt rich kid who's very naive, doesn't really work or do anything for a living. He's very well off, right? And he decides he wants to be a landlord for a living. And so he buys up this kind of cheap tenement block in, where is it that he buys it? Is it Harlem? Wait, is this even set in New York? I can't remember. Park Slope, that's in Brooklyn. Of course it's in New York. Brooklyn, yeah. He buys this apartment block there and basically arrives there, announces to all the tenants that basically he's the new landlord, things are going to change, you're going to start paying your rent on time, all this stuff. But he's also kind of naive in the sense that he gets taken in by all the residents and how they manipulate him, or, you know, and say, well, you know, this needs fixing, that needs fixing. But he actually also starts getting very close to some of them, and forging kind of different relationships with them, some of them intimate. And it becomes a film about essentially I think the political points it wants to make it does do rather well, which is this, the idea of what is the relationship between a landlord and a tenant, namely what is the political and social function of a landlord. I think is really, really interesting. I think the penultimate scenes in this film are excellent. They're the best, where I can't give too much away, but I just think they hit pretty hard, is what I'm going to say. And I also think, again, with Ashby, the editing is really, really interesting. You have kind of like these almost kind of these scenes that bleed into one another, but you're not quite sure whether you almost get mixture of parallel editing mixed with some kind of flashback or fantasy or editing mixed in there with what you're seeing in the contemporary sense as well. So that's really, really interesting filmmaking, I think. So Ashby really got his style down early on. Like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of him, but I think this is definitely one of his more interesting films, in my opinion, and kind of forgotten. So pick up The Landlord and give it a chance. Stars Beau Bridges, who's the kind of less famous brother of Jeff Bridges, who I'm a huge fan of. I love Jeff Bridges. But yeah, really, really good film. So I recommend that as well. Yeah, and those are the 5 guys. So let me know what you think. If you've seen any of these movies, let me know your thoughts. If you haven't, hopefully you'll be intrigued based upon this to watch them, because I think they're all worth a watch for sure. All to varying degrees, very good films. So yeah, let me know what you think. And with that, guys, I will see you on the next one, which should be in the next few days, I hope. So yeah, as always, take care.